let's get divorced because I have a new family. You and our daughter need to leave. Oh, and just so we're clear, I won't be paying any settlement money. Nelson declared this while AITA nodded enthusiastically beside him. Their attitude suggested they thought I was the one in the wrong. Only the babies in the stroller were blissfully unaware, sleeping peacefully. Nelson hadn't helped at all when Dakota was born either. He spent his days fooling around, and even dipped into Dakota's college funds. Despite never fulfilling his duties as a father, here he was, selfishly creating a new family for his own pleasure. Did he ever consider how Dakota and I would feel? As various thoughts raced through my mind leaving me speechless, Dakota pointed to the TV that had been left on and said, "Huh? Dad, aren't you watching TV?" At those words, Nelson burst into shouting. "My name is Angela. I'm in my 50s and a housewife. I live with my husband Nelson and our daughter Dakota. I met Nelson at the company I joined after graduating from college. If there's anything you don't understand, don't hesitate to ask." Although I had been assigned a senior employee as my trainer, I was nervous and inexperienced, struggling to speak up. That's when Nelson approached me with those kind words. Nelson patiently taught me about the job, and I naturally began asking him various questions. During this time, we grew closer quickly. Eventually, Nelson confessed to me. "I fell for how dedicated you are to your work. Would you go out with me?" "I'd love to." Since I had feelings for Nelson too, we started dating and quickly got married. A few years later, we were blessed with Dakota. However, not every day was happy. In fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say those days were filled with pain. The cause was Nelson's infidelity. This happened when I was pregnant with Dakota. Until then, Nelson had treated me very preciously, and when he learned I was pregnant, he even said thank you with tears in his eyes. I had severe morning sickness, to the point where just smelling food would make me nauseous. After marriage, Nelson had strongly insisted that I quit my job. Since Nelson was being considered for a promotion at the time, I accepted his request. After becoming a full-time housewife, I took care of all the household chores. I felt this was natural since I was staying at home, but cooking while feeling so ill was truly painful. "Hey, I'm sorry, but would it be okay if we eat out or buy ready-made meals for a while?" Though I felt guilty asking this when I was entrusted with the housework, I gathered my courage and asked Nelson, who was relaxing in the living room. He furrowed his brow for a moment before asking in a stern voice, "Why? You're a housewife, aren't you? Since you're not working, you need to properly take care of the housework. Otherwise, you're just a parasite." Certainly, there was no error in what Nelson was saying. The fact is, I'm currently living off Nelson's money. It's perfectly reasonable to expect housework in exchange for that. But I simply couldn't do it, and I wasn't being lazy either. Trying to convey these feelings, I desperately pleaded with Nelson. "The morning sickness makes me feel nauseous. Just smelling food makes me want to throw up. Honestly, even other housework is difficult with my heavy belly." "Shut up. That's just making excuses. You're a housewife, so do your housework properly. What if my health suffers from this kind of diet? It's your job to prepare nutritious, loving meals to welcome your husband home." His words were so harsh that I felt dizzy on the spot. I'm not asking him to help every day, but Nelson just relaxes in the living room on his days off. He could at least help a little with the housework. No matter how desperately I tried to convey my feelings, Nelson wouldn't listen at all. so I forced myself to do the housework while enduring my heavy belly and nausea. Though it was a continuous hell, when Dakota was born, I felt both relief that the painful days were finally over and was moved by the sight of Dakota crying in the delivery room. Nelson said he was working and wouldn't even come to the hospital when I contacted him, let alone be present for the birth. The nurses looked somewhat uncomfortable seeing this, but holding Dakota made me forget all the unpleasant things. I decided from the bottom of my heart that I would protect this child for life. I would make sure she could live without any hardship. As expected, or perhaps I should say predictably, Nelson didn't participate in childcare at all. To save money for raising Dakota, I decided to put her in daycare and started working from home. Of course, I had discussed this with Nelson too. Someone like you with no skills doing work from home is hardly different from playing around. It probably won't make much money, but do whatever you want. Nelson sneered without even listening to what kind of work it was. Though I felt frustrated, I was determined to use those feelings as motivation and work hard. Papa. Play with me. As always, Nelson would just relax in the living room on his days off, so Dakota would sometimes call out to him like this. If it were me, I would have immediately smiled and played with her, but Nelson would look annoyed at Dakota and shoo her away. Papa's busy. I don't have time to play with you. Go play with Mama. Saying this, he would hurriedly get ready and leave. Come to think of it, Nelson seems to have been going out more frequently lately. Not just on holidays, but his return time on weekdays seems to be getting later too. I checked his pay stub, but there was no sign of overtime work. Since I used to work at his company, I knew it wasn't the kind of place that forced excessive unpaid overtime. Could it be an affair? When that word crossed my mind, I immediately hired a detective. Sure enough, it was discovered that my husband was having an affair with a woman. How could you do this when we have Dakota? This is unacceptable as a father. Let's get divorced. Burning with anger, I immediately confronted Nelson with divorce papers. However, Nelson tried to placate me, saying, "Please, anything but divorce. What about Dakota? If her father disappears while she's so young, it will affect her personality." To be honest, I had that concern. If we divorce now, Dakota would be raised by a single parent. Even if it didn't affect her personality, she might get bullied at school. However, such things couldn't calm my anger. I thought we would surely end up divorcing. That's what I thought, but something made me reconsider the divorce. It was Dakota's sleep talking. "Papa, let's play." Dakota mumbled this in a small voice while breathing steadily in her sleep. Since Nelson's affair was discovered, there had been a tense atmosphere in the house. Dakota must have sensed this somehow. Even so, this child still yearned for her father. Her dedication brought tears to my eyes, and at the same time, I felt disgusted with myself for almost taking her father away from her out of anger. When Dakota no longer needs a father, then we can divorce. Changing my mind like this, I decided not to divorce, on the conditions that I would demand more than the usual compensation from the mistress, and Nelson would spend time with Dakota once a week. In the end, Nelson apparently paid the settlement money that his mistress should have paid, but I didn't care about that. I just wanted to deal a blow to both of them. After that, Nelson kept his promise and played with Dakota once a week. However, that didn't last long either. I wanted to complain about him breaking his promise, but now that our relationship had been repaired and we weren't fighting every day, I couldn't bring myself to dig up the past and make Dakota suffer again. Time passed like that, and we entered our 50s as a couple. Dakota had passed 20, gotten a job, and could live independently. Nelson had been on overseas assignment for 3 years, so I ended up staying alone at home during that time. Worried about me, Dakota continued living with me even after getting a job. Since starting his overseas assignment, Nelson rarely showed his face at home. Nelson's existence naturally disappeared from our lives. That day was Dakota's day off from work, and we were spending time leisurely watching TV and eating snacks. Then, ding-dong, the doorbell rang. Yes? When I checked, there stood Nelson with a young blonde woman holding a stroller. At first glance, this woman appeared to be about the same age as Dakota. Twin babies were sleeping peacefully in the stroller. Not understanding what was going on just from seeing this on the monitor, I nervously but still opened the door to let them in. Nice to meet you, ma'am. I'm AITA. I'm in a relationship with Nelson. I was stunned by her words. This man had betrayed his family not once, but twice. Moreover, this time with a woman barely older than his daughter. The very thought of a man in his 50s being infatuated with someone so young made me nauseous. Seeing that I was too shocked to say anything, Nelson must have thought I was devastated. With a shallow, frivolous smile, he said, "As you can see, I have a new family, so let's get divorced. You and our daughter need to leave. Oh, and just so we're clear, I won't be paying any settlement money." Oh no. Nelson, that's terrible, AITA said playfully. Nelson's eyes sparkled as if proud of what he'd said, while AITA egged him on. They both smiled at my speechlessness as if mocking me. Only the babies in the stroller were blissfully unaware, breathing steadily in their sleep. Their appearance reminded me of Dakota's sleep-talking from back then. However, Dakota, who had been quietly watching us, suddenly pointed at the TV. Huh? Dad, aren't you watching TV? At those words, everyone's attention turned to the TV. There was a news headline that read a talk of the town, female CEO. Rumors of $5 billion in annual revenue. When the camera switched to show the interview subject, Nelson suddenly started shouting. What's going on? Why are you on TV? Yes, the CEO being interviewed was me. After Dakota entered daycare, I started working from home. Though it was very small work at first, as things started going well, I established a company to help others like me find good opportunities. At first, I wasn't sure how it would go, but apparently there was unexpected demand, and our performance grew until we were listed as a public company 2 years ago. Now we're considered a dream company for people in this field, with endless job applications and work requests. Nelson turned pale when I explained this. AITA was flustered for a moment too, but seeing Nelson's state, she quickly tried to cover for him. But Nelson earns money too, right? Maybe not $5 billion, but you said you're a department head. And you have another promotion coming up, right? Hearing those words, I couldn't help but say what? Apparently, Nelson had been telling lies to win AITA over. This person isn't a department head, just a regular employee. What? It's true that Nelson had been considered for promotion when we first married. However, those promotion talks ended. The reason was that Nelson had embezzled company money. Even if it was a small amount, embezzlement is embezzlement. Feeling sorry for Nelson, who was crying about what a terrible thing he'd done, I apologized to the president repeatedly and repaid several times the amount Nelson had embezzled, with interest. Of course, that money came from my savings. Thanks to certain connections with the president, he agreed to keep employing Nelson on the condition that he would absolutely never be promoted, after I desperately apologized. I'm truly grateful to the president, but I also think I made an unnecessary effort. In the end, Nelson couldn't get promoted after that, so naturally he couldn't become a department head. He probably lied to make himself look better to AITA. When I revealed this, AITA turned pale. Why did you lie? You weren't a department head. Just a regular employee. This is unbelievable. If I had known that, I would never have done this. AITA shouted as if throwing a tantrum. Nelson pleaded to her tearfully. I had no choice. I just wanted you to notice me. That's how much I love you. The drama between these two adults was quite unsightly. In the midst of this truly chaotic scene, Dakota brought an envelope from her room and spread its contents on the table. Actually, I knew about Dad's affair. Everyone there, including me, was surprised by Dakota's words. According to her, it started when a friend of hers spotted Nelson in Japan when he was supposed to be on an overseas business trip. After being shown photos and confirming it was definitely Nelson, Dakota immediately hired a detective to investigate. She explained the situation to my parents and used their money to cover the investigation costs, focusing on tracking Nelson's movements around where he was spotted. This revealed massive evidence of the affair. However, she couldn't bring herself to report it to me. She worried that if I received too big a shock. The mistress was someone close to her age. She felt it would deal a huge blow to my heart, so she decided to watch the situation for a while. Then this incident occurred. The table was covered with documents and photos proving Nelson and AITA's affair. Though the two turned red-faced seeing this, Dakota continued speaking. To be honest, what you're doing is the worst, Dad. Betraying Mom and selfishly creating a new family elsewhere is absolutely unforgivable. I don't have many memories of you playing with me, but I'm really disappointed in you. Dakota must be feeling indescribable disgust. I too feel it's such a waste to spend any more time with these people. I just want to settle this quickly. But for that, they need to face proper consequences. Of course I'll be demanding settlement money. And I'll be informing the president about this as well. When I mentioned the president, Nelson's face turned pale. That's understandable. The president I referred to is, of course, the president of Nelson's company. If this matter comes to light, Nelson, who had already committed misconduct, will surely be fired this time. Wait, how can you even contact the president directly? You're just a former employee. You shouldn't have that kind of authority. About that. AITA was right. Normally, even a former employee couldn't easily contact the president directly. Why was I able to do this? The answer lay in my relationship with the president. The president and my father are childhood friends. At those words, both Nelson and AITA said, "What?" I hadn't even told Nelson about this. What do you mean? I never heard about this. It's exactly what it sounds like. My father has a long relationship with the president, which is why I got a job at that company. Oh, don't misunderstand, it wasn't nepotism. Thanks to that connection, we were able to handle the situation when Nelson embezzled money, but that turned out to be meaningless. I wonder how the president will feel knowing his dear friend's daughter has been hurt this much. When I deliberately mused this way, Nelson's face turned from blue to white. That's understandable. If I say one word to the president, he could be fired immediately. Nelson is already guilty of embezzlement. If he loses his current job, he probably won't be able to find another one. In that case, he'll truly end up on the streets. Surely Ida can't support the twins and cover living expenses for the whole family on her income alone, so they'd all go down together. What's going on? I thought if I married a department head, my future would be secure. I thought I could live an easy life. Really, what are you going to do about this? Having faced reality, Ida grabbed Nelson's collar, her face red with anger. That's to be expected, he turned out to be just a liar. While being shaken by Ida, Nelson desperately tried to maintain a smile. Of course, his face was still pale. But think about it. With the power of love, we can overcome this. We have a family. Let's work hard to protect our family. I believed we could do it together, Ida. What a pathetic pickup line. But such sweet words wouldn't sway Ida. Surely Ida wasn't interested in Nelson himself, but rather in the large amount of money she thought he had. In the first place, it's extremely unlikely for a young woman like Ida to genuinely like a man in his 50s. There might be a slight chance if he took care of his appearance, but Nelson looked his age. Even if I were younger, I wouldn't want to date someone like him. This is unforgivable. The marriage is off. You better pay child support. These children are yours after all. What? Weren't you going to marry me? This isn't what we agreed on. Nelson pleaded tearfully at Ida's words. However, Dakota interrupted these two. But we don't even know if those children are really yours, do we? What? What do you mean? As we tilted our heads in confusion at Dakota's words, she pulled something else from the envelope. Apparently, there were still more documents she hadn't shown. No. Stop. Ida screamed shrilly and lunged for the table. In the process, a single photo fluttered down. It showed Ida walking in a hotel district with another man. You had other men besides Nelson. What did you say? At my words, Nelson snatched the photo from my hand. Seeing it, Nelson's face turned bright red this time. With that momentum, he yelled at Ida. What's the meaning of this? You betrayed me too. I genuinely loved you. How dare you fool around with other men? No. It's not like that. Shut up. These children probably aren't even mine. I won't acknowledge them as mine until we get a DNA test. Ida broke down crying at Nelson's words. To think she would not only have an affair but try to pass off another man's children as his. I was almost impressed by how cunning she was despite being Dakota's age. With evidence of the affair, I could easily claim settlement money. Nelson and Ida's relationship was surely beyond repair now. Just when I thought everything was settled, Nelson suddenly got down on his knees. What are you doing? When I asked, Nelson desperately cried out. I realize now that Angela is the only one for me. I only love you. I might not have been a good husband, but I'll try harder this time. Please give me another chance. I can't live without you, Angela. What nonsense about can't live without me. If that were really true, he wouldn't have gotten involved with Ida. Being told such things now doesn't move me at all. Sorry, but I have no intention of withdrawing the divorce. Dakota and I will leave this house. I'll mail you the divorce papers, so make sure you fill them out and submit them to the office properly. Saying this, I returned to my room. Dakota also seemed to understand what she needed to do and went back to her room. By the time we finished preparing our belongings, Ida and the babies were gone, but Nelson was alone in the living room, crying bitterly. Please reconsider. Don't leave me alone. Though he desperately clung to us saying such things, we completely ignored him. We left the house together. After that, Dakota and I decided to stay at a hotel for the time being. We plan to move as soon as we find a house. I've mailed the divorce papers and consulted with a lawyer. If there's any delay in submitting the divorce papers, I can consult about that too. I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Dakota is going to work as usual. At first, I suggested we look for separate houses, but apparently Dakota sees me as very lonely, so she said, let's live together in the new house too. While relying on such a thoughtful Dakota, I'm looking for a new house, working, and sometimes going out to play with her. With the nuisance called Nelson gone, I have more time to enjoy with Dakota instead. This time is the first since marriage where I can truly enjoy various things from the bottom of my heart without any anxiety. However, such happy times didn't last long either. That day was a weekday, and I was at the office. After checking the day's schedule with my secretary, I was working at my computer. That's when my phone started ringing loudly. It was from Nelson. Of course, I couldn't answer during work hours. I make a point of clearly separating work and private life. So I ignored it, but it rang again. It would stop, then ring again loudly. This kept repeating. How annoying. Finding it bothersome, I decided to answer the still ringing phone after returning to the hotel. Looking at the call history, it seems he had been calling continuously since I first noticed it. Before I could say, hello, Nelson's anguished cry came through. Help me. I'm about to lose the house. Honestly, hearing Nelson's words, I couldn't help but sigh. Is that all? That's obvious, isn't it? After all, that house is in my name. Yes, I was the owner of the house where we had lived as a family. To be precise, it was initially in both Nelson's and my names. However, after Nelson's embezzlement, when promotion became impossible, we changed the registration to my name alone since he would likely struggle with loan payments. In other words, I had been paying all the house loans by myself. Since Nelson had only contributed a tiny amount, it was natural to evict him if I wasn't living there. Despite this being perfectly reasonable, he couldn't even realize that. It seems I had been spoiling Nelson for far too long. If I had expressed my will more clearly, would the future have been different? Seemingly finally remembering these events after hearing my words, Nelson desperately clung on, refusing to give up. Please help me. The president has fired me. At this rate, I'll lose not just my job but my house too. How am I supposed to live like this? That's not my problem. Figure it out yourself. This situation is entirely Nelson's own doing. If Nelson hadn't betrayed us, even if we weren't getting along well, we could have managed somehow as a family. The fact that we couldn't is entirely Nelson's fault. Yet Nelson wouldn't accept his own guilt and instead pathetically begged. How could he continue to show such a shameful side? Showing such a face won't make me sympathize with him. My relationship with Nelson is already over. Honestly, I found it distasteful even dealing with him, so I decided to end it clearly. If you delay submitting the divorce papers, we'll go to court. That would make it even harder to find a job, wouldn't it? Poor thing. I wonder if you'll be able to pay the settlement money too. I could hear Nelson catch his breath on the other end of the phone. Then I added another blow. Oh, yes, about the president. He seemed angrier than I expected. Apparently, he's spreading word about you to various places. Good thing you're not famous. No. Please do something. If this happens, I'll Nelson's voice was colored with pure despair. I couldn't help but smile because it was so satisfying. But this too was all Nelson's fault. Nelson had continued betraying Dakota and me for years. Surely, marrying Nelson itself was a mistake. Why did I marry someone like him? From the bottom of my heart, I felt ashamed of my younger self for being attracted to Nelson. I don't care. You brought this on yourself, didn't you? Well, I'm hanging up now. I'll send you the lawyer's contact information later, so please direct all future communication there. Goodbye. Wait, Angela. Don't abandon me. After Nelson's final words, I hung up. Though the phone kept ringing multiple times after that, I immediately blocked Nelson's number, sent only the lawyer's contact information, and blocked his messages too. Now Nelson can never contact me again. I decided to tell Dakota to block his contact information too, feeling relieved that things were finally settled. According to what I heard from the lawyer afterward, though Nelson initially resisted submitting the divorce papers, he quietly submitted them when told it might go to court. However, things didn't end there. To pay the settlement money to me, Nelson borrowed a large sum from suspicious sources. You might wonder why he went to such places, but after this incident, his parents-in-law had given up on him. I had already spoken with his friends beforehand, so Nelson had nowhere to turn to, resulting in him having to resort to such places. Though he managed to pay the settlement money, Nelson couldn't repay his loans, and I heard through the grapevine that he was taken away by some suspicious people and is now working on a fishing boat somewhere at sea. I also demanded settlement money from AITA. However, it was all paid by AITA's parents. Though I thought I might not have dealt her much of a blow, that wasn't the case. Her parents were so enraged by this incident that they now manage all her income too. As a result, despite being young, she can't freely use her own salary, and her beauty is fading rapidly. By the way, those babies indeed turned out not to be Nelson's children. They're now being taken care of by AITA's parents. When I met them once with the lawyer present, they seemed like decent people, so I'm sure those twins will grow up fine. I secretly felt relieved about that. Since then, I've been spending my days leisurely while working. Actually, Dakota also works at my company as an office worker. Though I don't intend to show favoritism just because she's my daughter, Dakota is quite an excellent employee and is beloved by everyone in the company. One day, this Dakota told me she had something to talk about. Though I worried what it could be, hopefully not misconduct, I smiled when I saw the young man standing next to her. I've decided to get married. Dakota said this shyly. As a parent, I think I've caused her a lot of hardship. She must have had many painful experiences. Still, she grew up to be such a fine person as my daughter, and tears suddenly fell at her happiest announcement in the world. Oh, Mom, you're jumping the gun. Save that for the wedding ceremony, right? Dakota took out a handkerchief and wiped my tears. Seeing me cry so ungracefully, the young man standing next to her also smiled, saying, "What a wonderful mother." There were many painful things that made me want to run away. But I was able to overcome them because Dakota was there. I intend to continue being a person who won't bring shame to her as her mother.